Stress and how we deal with it is ultimately what makes or breaks us. Stress in the broad sense, as Dr. Hans Selye defines it, is the non-specific response of the organism to any demands made on it, meaning stress is just living life. Stress is both physical and emotional. For example, physical stress can be divided into two categories, physical and chemical. Physical stressors would be traumas, slips and falls, jars and strains, and accidents such as that. Chemical stresses would be any chemical insult on the body. Expressions of this would be undereating or overeating, malnutrition, toxic poisoning, or microinvasion. Emotional stress is fear and worry, emotional upset, or negative autosuggestion. And probably 80% of our stress is emotional and 20% physical and chemical. And 80% of our emotional stress is that negative autosuggestion or our own negative self-talk. Now the rule is when outside stress is more than our inside resistance, that's when something goes wrong. Or vice versa. When our inside resistance is less than our outside stress, something goes wrong. For example, if a person is bitten by a black mamba snake, which is the most toxic poisonous snake in the world, it'll certainly kill them. I don't care how positive the person might have thought, or how well he or she might have eaten, or if they exercised. If you're bitten by a black mamba snake, I guarantee that'll kill you. Conversely, you can have a very low resistance or vitality, be stung by an ordinary bee and have an allergic reaction and die from that as well. The variable between inside resistance and outside stress is always changing. As far as stress, there are two types of stress we must deal with. One is a very simple, overt type of stress, although it may be very traumatic. For example, let's say a pregnant woman meets a saber-toothed tiger in the forest. Instantly, her tension levels go up. Hormonal changes take place. Alternative neurological circuits come into play, and over 100 physiological reactions take place. This person is now ready to attack or run away. They're ready for fight or flight. But once the danger is over and the stressor is gone, we're either safe or we won the fight, the tension levels return back down to normal. Our hormone levels come back down and stress switches turn off, and hopefully we have enough time to recover before this whole process happens again. That kind of stress, that well-defined stress that has a well-defined beginning and an end, we are designed to deal with. We are able to handle that kind of stress fairly well. The problem is we live in a culture, we live in a world where we have modern complex stress all the time. For example, we have the same baseline stress that we had in primitive times, but by the time we're 4 or 5 years old, our baseline has moved up higher. We're dealing with a complex stress such as pollution and time pressures, job stress and lack of exercise, noise, driving down congested highways, and such. We have a very complex stress in this time and culture that's ill-defined. It doesn't have a definite beginning or an end. It's pervasive and it continues on and on and on. And that kind of stress we're not designed to deal with. Say a stressful situation happens, something with high emotional content or with pain. Instantly we peak up. We're ready for fight or flight. Then the fight or flight doesn't happen. See, we don't attack and we don't run away. We're trained in this culture to put on a mask and to act like nothing happened when in fact it did. So we put on the mask, in other words, we play dead and act like nothing of consequences happened. But now we're geared for battle, we're geared for war, and act like nothing happened. So the stress levels, the tension levels, the hormones, the stress switches, they all come on and then they come back down, but they don't even come down to the last baseline we had. They come down to a higher baseline. Then 5 or 6 months later, another major stress event happens and we peak up again and come back down to even another higher baseline. And after 10, 15, 20 years, the average person finds that their baseline has moved from here at birth, here at 5 or 6, and way up here by age 20. Scientists now tell us by age 20 we probably have hundreds of stress switches that came on that were never quite shut off, whereby we are here in a high stress state all the time. There is much research data on this, in fact, proved that this is the situation today. Now this is the type of stress that we're not well designed to deal with, and that's the problem today. Let me illustrate it another way. First there's overstress, and I've illustrated that here. There's a sequence of things that happens when we're overstressed. First there's weakness, then there's tension, then there's imbalance, then there's a long incubation time, and then ultimately we have degenerative disease. The sequence is always the same. First weakness, then tension, then imbalance, then symptoms, then degenerative disease. Let me illustrate that another way. This drawing is a baseline. This vertical line illustrates a broom handle. It's balanced. These are rubber bands on each side holding it into place. And then here's a candle. Suppose the candle melts the rubber band on this side and the rubber band becomes flaccid and loose. Then the rubber band on the other side that has normal tone, now that its partner has lost its strength and tone, the rubber band on the opposite side contracts and pulls the broom handle out of balance. First there's weakness, then there's tension, and then there's imbalance. The same sequence applies to a person. First there's weakness, then there's tension, and then there's imbalance. Then we go into a pre-degenerative disease state. Weakness, tension, and imbalance is in fact a high stress state. It means we're ready to attack or run away. Even though it doesn't happen, the wisdom of the body still thinks we're in great danger and we prepare for it. Again, even though it doesn't happen, there is still a great physiological consequence for this. And that's what we'll talk about now. A human being is a self-healing, self-repairing, and self-correcting mechanism. Not only that, we're self-biomechanically balancing, self-neurologically strengthening, and self-detensing. So if this is true, and it is, all physiologists agree that it is, if we're not only self-healing, self-balancing, self-strengthening, and self-detensing, why then are almost all adults without exception biomechanically out of balance and neurologically compromised? Almost all are. For example, no one should have bad teeth, and almost everybody does. The reason this is true is because of the kind of stress we have to deal with in this world today, this complex kind of stress. So here we are. The wisdom of the body wants us to be in balance, wants us not to have tension. But the wisdom of the body, perceiving that we're in danger, it readies us for attack. When it comes to perceiving that danger, it becomes a higher priority than just maintaining our normal metabolism and structural balance, because that can mean life or death. So the wisdom of the body works in a priority way. Its major priority is to protect us from life or death, and it thinks that we're in that kind of jeopardy when in fact we're not. What we're concerned about here is in fact shutting off those stress switches and allowing the wisdom of the body to realize, to perceive in fact, that we're not in danger so it can deal with that in a proper way. Come back into inner directed instead of outer reactive and maintain us into a state of structural balance. Now, through our history, this sequence of events has been dealt with in all sorts of ingenious ways. First, remember that there's overstress. Then there's weakness. Then there's tension. Then there's imbalance. Then there's a long take it for granted pre-degenerative disease state with all sorts of symptoms that come and go until we ultimately have a serious degenerative disease. For example, in this country, the Disease Control Center says this: by age 65, 95% of people in this nation will have a serious terminal, irreversible degenerative disease problem. These didn't start by the time we got to 65. For example, 1 in 2 die of heart disease, 1 in 3 get cancer, and 1 in 5 die of cancer. Diabetes is the 5th leading cause of disease in this country. Diabetes has increased over 1,800% over the last 50 years, and on and on and on. What we're finding is that this is a far more stressful world than we had thought, and we are far more vulnerable than we had previously thought. So the problem is, though, we obviously don't want to wait until we have a degenerative problem. We want to address it when it's in its pre-degenerative state. For example, cancer oftentimes has a lead-in time of 20 to 25 years, even 30 years. The person is pre-cancerous before they have their first symptom. The same is true with heart disease and all other degenerative diseases. So what we've done in the past historically, traditionally medical doctors, whether they were naturalistic or holistic in their approach, or they were drug-orientated allopaths primarily, they were concerned with diseases and symptoms of these diseases. For example, with traditional medical doctors, if you have a pain, they'll give you a pain pill. If you're tense, you'll get a muscle relaxant. If you have constipation, they'll give you something to give you diarrhea. If you have diarrhea, you'll get something for constipation. Remember, these things don't have much of anything to do with causes. It's purely a symptomatic treatment approach. If your doctor was more holistic or natural in their approach, he might treat you with herbs or vitamins, tell you to have a positive attitude and exercise and things like that. Still, though, these things are to treat your degenerative disease or your symptoms. About 100 years ago or so, a new doctor came on the scene, the osteopath and the chiropractor. The osteopath and the chiropractor were concerned about structure. They knew that structure and function were related. That's basic in science. For example, if the structure is distorted, there will be an abnormal function. Structure and function are related. You see it in every area of life. The structural integrity of the bridge determines the functional capacity of the bridge to stand. The structure of the cell determines the capacity of the cell to function. Structure and function are related. The chiropractor and the osteopath said to the traditional medical doctor, "You're treating symptoms. There's a cause for that, and the cause is the structural aberration." The chiropractors knew that if they removed the structural distortions, the system that controls all the functions of the body, brain, spinal cord, and nervous system could do what it was designed to do. That was a better idea. Then 50 years ago, a new kind of therapist came on the scene and began telling the osteopath and the chiropractor that they too were in fact also treating symptoms. That muscles move bones, that if you didn't have the muscles to hold up the skeletal frame, you just have a big pile of bones on the floor. So then you have the deep tissue muscle workers of the Rolfers. They had very sophisticated ways to try to relax the tension. Those types of therapists had an even better idea. Then even more recently, a different type of therapist came. A therapy called radionics and systems that deal with subtle magnetic energy. Some call it bioplasmic energy. What these therapists try to do is get energy from the outside, inside of the body, to help make it function more effectively. Reiki therapists do that. Polarity therapists do that. Our contention here is that all of these people, in fact, are treating symptoms. Remember the broom handle analogy over here? First there's weakness, then there's tension, then there's imbalance. We know the sequence always applies. Kinesiologists proved this in 1964. What we're concerned about in Alphabiotics is not, in fact, to treat your degenerative disease. It's not to deal with your symptoms. It's not to try to put bones back into place like a chiropractor or osteopath, or try to relax your tension like a physical therapist would, or try to channel energy to put back into weak areas. Our concern is what we see as the primary cause factor beyond all of that. We see it all over the world as a neuron hookup problem in the brain. There is a dysynchronicity in the brain. There is a cellular miscommunication. The wisdom of the body perceives that we're in danger and is preparing us when in fact we're not in danger because of the complex stress we deal with. So we consider this to be our primary problem, a neuron hookup problem. Beyond that, there's a schism between the material and the immaterial self, between the higher self and the egocentric self. But on a physical level, it's a neuron hookup problem. Remember, the wisdom of the body is self-healing, self-repairing, self-strengthening, self-correcting, self-detensing, and self-balancing. Almost no one has this kind of integrity. Almost everyone is compromised in this way and, in fact, in a high-stress pre-degenerative disease state. Weakness, tension, and imbalance is a high-stress state. It's also a pre-degenerative disease state. See, everyone is either getting better or getting worse. No one ever stands still. We're either moving toward our own natural biological potential or moving away from it. When a person is imbalanced in this way or compromised in this way, they're moving the wrong way. What we're concerned about here is helping them stop that progression, turn around, and help them move the other way, in a way that's scientifically duplicatable and measurable. Now, a balance like this is very much like having a string tied tightly around your finger. If the string is there, obviously it's not only cutting off circulation, but life energy in the finger. Now, I don't care what you do to the finger short of undoing the string, you will still have a problem. For example, you can love the finger, or you could pray about it, or you could massage it, or exercise it. You could eat some food, or take some herbs, or take medication, or take shots for it. Nothing you did short of removing the string would be of any consequence. Not that all those things are bad, but once you undid the string, then would be the time to take herbs or any of those other things that would be life enhancing. What we're concerned about in Alphabiotics is literally undoing the string. Now let's talk a little bit about this neuron hookup problem that I mentioned earlier. We use a very impressive, ingenious, amazing, brain hemispherically balancing exercise to demonstrate this point. For example, in this testing we do, we will test for these calamities. We'll test you for biomechanical balance, we check leg length, hip levels, we do some standard neurological testing, we test for tension, we also do some very standard nerve muscle tests, actually kinesiological testing, testing for weak areas of the body. Once we determine that these three parameters, these three factors are obvious in your body, we know that you're in fact in a high stress state. Then we'll do a little exercise. Actually, you do it yourself, and it has to do with stressing the system and causing it to shift from one brain hemisphere to the other and then shift back. Now, to explain that a little bit, if you're compromised in this way that we've been talking about, it means that one side of your body will be more contracted than the other. One hip will be high, one leg will be short. There will be more tension on that side and more weakness on the other side. We can easily measure the high hip and the short leg, and we can feel for tension and test for weakness using physiological tests. But as I said, one side is always more contracted than the other, and we know that weakness precedes tension. For most people, probably 75% of people in this culture are right side contracted, which means they're left brain dominant. It means that they're physiologically imbalanced on the right, but they're left brain dominant as far as the hemispheres of the brain. Remember, the left side of the brain controls the functions on the right side of the body, and the right side of the brain controls the functions on the left side of the body. So if a person is distorted in this way, not only will they be biomechanically and neuromuscularly out of balance, but they'll be brain hemispherically out of balance as well, as far as right and left brain is concerned. Obviously, we can do better if we're hemispherically in balance and neuromuscularly competent. So if a person is distorted in this way, one side contracted, the other side weak, and they're locked into one hemisphere of the brain, they function primarily out of that hemisphere. Not that they're dead in the other hemisphere, but in a high stress situation, they'll certainly go into that dominant hemisphere and function from that. This exercise that we do after the testing is in fact to see if we can cause your body to shift from one hemisphere of the brain to the other and then shift back. This is totally painless and you're hardly aware that it even happens. But we test to monitor to make sure indeed that it is happening. As you shift from one hemisphere to the other hemisphere, the weak muscles on one side of the body will instantly become strong, and the strong muscles on one side of the body will instantly become weak. That means you shifted hemispheres. As you shift hemispheres, you shift tight and weak areas in the body, and then we do that again to have you shift back. What we're doing is a breathing exercise with an unusual movement of the feet, and it's stressing the system in a very mild way. Research has now taught us that over 100 million sensory impulses reach the brain every second, and all that data process is very well explained as function. So this exercise that we do adds that input into the brain and causes the hemispherical shift. Once that's happened, your inner wisdom then has something to compare against. It compared in the other hemisphere and then came back where it was and in fact now knows that you're not under attack. You're not in danger. There's no war that you need to be prepared for, fight or flight. Once that's done, then we hold two very simple contact points in the head, adding that little extra energy, and it allows the brain to synchronize itself. The brain synchronizes itself and then it automatically synchronizes the body. Then some amazing things happen. Where you were weak, you instantly become strong. Where you were tense, you become less tense. Where you were out of balance, where we measured before, you instantly go back into balance. That means you stop moving away from your natural potential, turned around, and then start headed back in the right direction. And that's the whole point. This exercise is so important, so dramatic, and so impressive that once you experience it, there's no one that can convince you that something very meaningful hasn't happened. This phenomenon that you'll experience, shifting from one hemisphere of the brain to the other, and then coming back into a more positive state of structural balance and homeostasis, is obviously the right method that works wonderfully when we're small children, and it still works for primitive people with a less stressful culture. It doesn't work very well in this complex, stressful world that we live in today, and as I said earlier, that's the problem. What we're concerned about is demonstrating that and then using our alignment process, which is different from the exercise that I've stated above, that gets you in a very profound state of energy balance that will hold at least 48 to 75 hours. Stress and how we deal with it is ultimately what makes or breaks us.